This session is devoted to three very important topics. They are three crucial aspects, three crucial issues, which have been also mentioned yesterday in the presentation of Gianni Taniolo. Crucial issues in explaining the economic growth process, the Italian economic growth process. They are also, for those of you who had the possibility to read the papers, you have certainly realized that there are connections among them, and especially the human capital is the issues which goes across the three papers, as we will have the opportunity to see this afternoon. And I will start by giving the floor to Giuseppe Bertola, who is presenting the paper on human capital. Also the co-author, Paolo Sestito, is here.
The paper tries to follow the connection between education and economic growth, which is a very difficult nexus of cause and effects, and the strategy is to compare periods during the history of Italy, other countries that are similar in many respects to Italy, how did they have a different education and possibly growth experience, and also, very importantly, regions within Italy, because Italy is a young country with a lot of regional heterogeneity. We start telling a very brief, especially in the presentation, history of what happened in terms of institutions in the Italian education system. Around 1860, some countries already had a relatively modern education system. These were countries like Prussia and the Netherlands, countries that were becoming nations at the time, like Italy. But within Italy, only some regions had state-controlled elementary schools. And these regions were those that were ruled by Austria and those also in the north that were part of the Kingdom of Sardinia. Also, secondary school institutions were differentiated within the country. In the north, there were gymnasi, Austrian type, and lycei, French types. In the south, there were mostly Jesuit schools, religious schools, and I could go on for a longer time than this, but basically in the paper we discuss these differences in the pre-unification situation. When the country came into being, immediately, even before every region became part of the country, there was a Piedmontese law, Legge Casati, and this law was very explicitly inspired by the German way of organizing education. Explicitly, it said, other countries do it differently, we will do it like the Germans do it. And what does it mean? There would be a primary school for nation-building purposes, to equip every citizen of the country with something that is common in terms of values, in terms of obedience to rules. One important feature of a country is the language, and it's important to remember that in 1860, less than 3% of the individuals in this new country spoke Italian. Italian was, like many other languages, an artificial construct that needed to be instilled into the citizens. Important problem. In theory, there would have been at least 3 years of compulsory education regardless of where you lived in Italy. In practice, funding of this mandatorily provided and mandatorily attended schooling was left at the municipal level. As a result, there was not a lot of funding, because not every city was willing and able to spend a lot in providing education to the children. And also it was very highly heterogeneous, the funding, again, across lines like north and south, city and countryside. In the design, there would also be secondary schools. And here the new nation put a lot of weight on having in every province a state-funded and controlled liceo, a higher secondary education institution, that, unlike religious schools, was inspired and controlled by the national government. Alongside this academic track, this elite track, this track meant to prepare the leaders of the country, at least in theory, there would be, in the German style, a more vocational track, itself divided into different types, scuole tecniche, scuole professionali. But it's important to remember that in the theoretical design of the new country's education system, this was present. Similarly, at the tertiary level, Italy had a lot, especially in the center and north, of very important, famous and old universities. These were all kept in the new national education system, but alongside it, especially starting from the 1870s, new tertiary institutions of a more vocational, practical, applied type were instituted in the engineering area, politecnici, and in the commercial area, scuole commerciali, and also Istituto Universitario Navale, agrarian schools. So a professional education was also envisioned at the tertiary level. This is the design. As usual, the practice is not necessarily the same as the theory. Only in the 1900s, as a result of both a left-leaning political environment, a more progressive environment, and also as a result of the availability of resources, thanks to the incipient industrial revolution, Italy finally was beginning to grow. These laws are important because they instituted state funding of primary schools. So the problem of low and heterogeneous funding of elementary schools, where every little comune was called to fund schools and was not always willing and able to do it, was finally resolved by the introduction of state central funding for elementary schools. Then comes fascism. After World War I, Gentile was a very important and controversial minister of education, and he introduced another important element of any education system. Not only the state would fund schools, but the state would also have powers to control, to inspect, and to examine the students. At the end of every course of study, there would be esame di Stato. The structure was very similar and actually stronger than the original Casati structure. Liceo Classico was the academic core, non-scientific, but the very theoretical way of trying to form the elites of the society. Alongside it, there would be quality-controlled primary schools, so finally there would be not only funding, but also a certification of what does it mean to be a maestro, an elementary school teacher. And there would be vocational tracks. And this has always been very controversial in Italy, because initially Gentile wanted the vocational track to be a dead end. Like in Germany, you would have to choose at 10 whether to continue to the university or to stop after learning a little bit of something. In Italy, this is always very controversial for good reasons, and subsequent reforms softened this in ways that generated something that was a complete, almost complete implementation, but not completely complete implementation of the original Casati design. So a tracked system with a clear definition of what is what. In 1962, Scuola Media Unica means that at least the lower secondary school is no longer tracked. So everybody goes to the same Scuola Media. And this means that, at least in theory, every Italian young person would get 8 years of mandatory free education. Everybody. However, in 1962, this was in principle already the case, even for people in the vocational tracks. They would have had to go to school for a long time, but in the early 1960s, only 2/3 of people aged 10 to 13 were actually enrolled in Scuola Media. So there is a mixture in Italy's institutional evolution of some principles and some practices that are not always in the same tune with each other. Next, maturity and deterioration, 1970 going on. The watershed, in our view, that happens in 1970 is the open access to university. As a result of the student tryouts, everybody was able to enroll in any university as long as they had any secondary school degree. This engendered a change in the structure of the university. There used to be also German-style elite with chairs and assistants. They become, by 1980, a mass of faculty peers unscreened. It was a dilution of the role of universities in Italian society. In the 1990s, they were given autonomy, the universities, but still not necessarily with any clear mandate of what they would have to do. Universities changed, and the upper secondary also had a problem because it was still tracked. There were still technical and academic tracks, but everybody was in principle able to access university. And this made it difficult to, in practice, have secondary education done in a coherent way. The lower secondary was still single track as of 1962, but it was unclear whether they should be completing the primary education or preparing some types of students for something and some others for something else. So lack of clarity is the characteristic of this period. Organizational problems. Teachers used to be appointed by the state, again, for a very brief period. After fascism, there was this situation where to be a teacher, you need to pass an exam and be appointed by the state. In this situation, no. Temporary appointments were the rule, and everybody was tenured after a while. And the fact that it was open access to the university also fed back into the organization of the schooling system, because so many people were finally able to go to university and get a degree that they felt entitled to do something worthy of having a graduate degree, and what is better than teaching in scuola media, in the junior school. Problem also that the state monitoring and examination powers is loosened over this period. This very fascist idea that the state would be on the back of the system and trying to orient it vanishes. And as a result, the standards of the teaching become very heterogeneous and, according to the data we look at in a moment, worsening over time. This is the problem with the Italian institutional situation. There is this debate between early tracking or comprehensive education. But the debate is never spelled out completely, and as a result, there is a patchwork of compromises. Some segments of the system are one way, other segments are in another way. Partial and contradictory reforms generate a system where it's hard to believe results would be very good. So we go on. We look at how does the system actually behave over time. Very briefly, in the long run, enrollment and spending begin to be by being very low, but then they are increasing over time. And one very important reason why enrollment and income increase is income goes up. Education on the demand side is a luxury good. There is a role for the military draft. So many people were enrolled in the military without an education that the military were telling them what to do. Outmigration was also having an effect. But the most important feature of Italy is this internal heterogeneity. The paper looks at the census up to 51. We look at literacy and enrollment after 1950. And this, we see that until 51, the regional differential remains stable. There is no convergence. From 1951, in terms of years of education, there is convergence. And eventually, across regions and genders, the years of education, this quantity measure of educational achievement, converges across regions and across genders. Problem? If you look at the performance in tests, there are large and persistent differentials in the effective skills across regions, but also across schools. There is work by Paolo and co-authors that looks at very large and persistent differences in how effectively schools, not only regions, give education to children and young people. And again, the reason is that this system is not a homogeneous system, it's a very heterogeneous system. How does the quantity of education compare in Italy with that of other countries? For example, this is the picture that was already in the presentation yesterday. Italy has lower quantity of education than peer countries. Finland catches up with the others. We stay below. We never catch up. We stay at a fair distance from the others. Maybe the quality would be very good, but there are data. Hanok and Versman have collected all the data about test performance in all possible tests, normalized by the type of test, and then you look at the country effects. And in this group of Western European countries, Italy has the lowest share of students reaching basic literacy, the lowest score in cognitive skills in maths and science, uniformly lower than the others. Over time, this is another interesting feature of reality. It's true, Italy lags behind, but what happens over time? There is an interesting exercise done by Meschi and Cervini, and we just show you the data. There are these cross-sectional results, cross-sectional surveys of how many years of schools and what competencies do people have. They are administered in a certain year, but of course the respondents, since it's adults, are of all ages, and it's possible to look in a picture to how many years of education does a cohort have and what are the competencies in terms of test scores of that cohort. This is Italy. People born in 1930-34 are much below in both respects people born in Finland in 30-34, people born in every other country. So Italy stays below, not only in terms of years of education, but also in terms of competencies, which is what we were seeing a moment ago. But if you look at the slope of this relationship, the slope is not so different from the others. So the more you go to school, the more you learn. Exception, people born in 1950-54, people born in 1955-59, like us. The second group goes to school more, but displays lower competencies. The quantity keeps increasing all the time, but the skills, it's not statistically significant, there are signs that the skills decline in a way that is not so different. It happens in other places. For example, it happens in the UK. When does it happen in the UK? If you were born in the UK in 1930, you were going to school during World War II. It was not such a good time. You were spending time in school, but you were not learning very much. Same thing in Italy. If you were going to school in the aftermath of the student riots, you were spending time there. Were you learning very much? Not clear. What about economic development? This is the picture. We know from yesterday, we know for a long time that Italy does not do well up until 1900, does great in the interwar, does not do so well since 1992, 1993. Relative to other countries, lots of other things happen to Italy and to other countries. Italy relatively does better in the post-war, does better in the early 1900s, does worse recently. Is there a role for education in this phenomenon? Maybe there is, so we look at it. It's possible to look at this kind of data. This is on the horizontal axis we have income, so a measure of economic development. On the vertical axis we have the average years of education in the population. Italy stays very much at the low border of the cloud of data, the cloud of possibility that exists in the world and in history. It means that Italy has been able to have higher income than its education would predict. Or seen in the other way, it manages to produce a lot, even though it does not have a lot of education. In early Italy, in the 1900s, there is evidence that we review briefly that the regions that I told you already had fairly modern schools in the early period were also the regions that industrialized more easily, so there is evidence that education did matter. In the post-war boom, the other time when Italy was doing really well, what is the evidence? If you look at GDP per worker, so a measure of economic development, and on the other axis you put the percentage of the population that has low, middle, or very high education. The data look like this. Italy, again, in this period of extremely fast growth, grows a lot, but it's not because it gives a lot of education to its individuals. Italy has the lowest amount of tertiary education in all this group of peer countries, industrialized countries, and this is a miracle. There is growth, despite very low secondary and tertiary schooling. And this is why we call it the post-war miracle. What could it be? Why did Italy grow so much in spite of not having high quantities of education? Maybe it had a lot of physical capital. No. Maybe it had a lot of natural resources. And an interesting finding is that the only countries that have higher GDP and comparable education are countries like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, countries with a lot of natural resources. Italy does not have those natural resources. It's possible that the resource that was put to work during the post-war period was some kind of cultural capital, at least somewhere in Italy, made it possible to produce very well and very high-quality goods using informal knowledge, not the kind of knowledge that comes from schooling, but the kind of knowledge that comes from informal contacts. And this is the distracted type of phenomenon, which interestingly, as we review briefly in the paper, comes with a lot of vocational and first following schooling and training, so very practical education did play a role, but not tertiary education. We have in the paper cross-sectional and parallel evidence of a phenomenon that says that in places where this mode of production was more prevalent, there was higher income potential, and not surprisingly, because you could do very well in the labor market without a degree, the incentives were not conducive to having a lot of schooling. So being in a province where there is a lot of made in Italy is also very likely to mean that you do not go beyond junior or maybe high school. You do not go to university. Interestingly, this relationship weakens in more recent decades, not very sharply, but it's possible to detect in the data the vanishing of the miracle of growth and income without education. You can begin to see that it was very much true in the 50s and 60s. The provinces with a lot of production of really very competitive products were not those where lots of people went to school. It begins to vanish by the 80s, 90s, the 2000s. It's becoming no longer the case. Which brings us to the last and important topic in this kind of research. Why is Italy stagnating? Many possible reasons. But this is what the data say. If you decompose labor productivity following the Groningen total factor productivity exercise, Italy lags behind peers between 89 in the last 20 years. Italy's productivity grows not a lot, and the reasons are mostly because of relatively low information and communication technology, and especially total factor productivity, which means organization. In terms of the quantity of education, Italy is actually doing better than Switzerland and Germany. If you adjust productivity by how many people have more years of education, a quantity measure of education, Italy is not doing so well as the UK, which is the star in this period. Lots of people go to school for a longer time, but does not do so terribly and does better than Switzerland and Germany. In terms of physical capital, Italy is in the middle of the pack. Physical capital does not appear to be a reason. Can education have something to do with this phenomenon of not being able to grow very much? Two possibilities. Maybe education has become more relevant. Now we live in a world where information and communication are more important. We live in a world where you need to reorganize in the face of globalization. The Chinese do everything we do, including the mafia, better than we do. And therefore, we need to have more general formal skills. It's a kind of world where you need to be going to school more, and the kind of informal local interactions that were keeping Italy going before no longer suffice. Again, because the Chinese do it even better than we do it. Second and last possibility. Maybe education has become more relevant, but maybe the deteriorating quality of education explains some of the slowdown of Italy relative to its peers. We have this finding that total factor productivity, even when you adjust for education, is low. It could be that we are poorly organized, we don't have enough competition, but it could also be that the year of education that is provided to students in Italy now is not really worth as much as the education provided by other countries. Italians working in the boom were educated in the 1920s and 30s. And the boom starts 20 years later. The system devised by the fascist regime was debatable, but it was coherent, it was tracked, and it was monitored. Italians entered in the labor force in the 1990s. this is 20 years later than the complicated reforms of the 1970s. And what is the characteristic of the educational system that has developed over this period? We have this eternally reformed and very partially reformed system, patchwork, and it has a characteristic that schools and teachers are becoming more autonomous, so there is no more state inspections and state selection. It's much more left to local realities, which is all very fine, and it can be a good idea as long as they are accountable, as long as at least ex post somebody is bothering them if they don't do well. This is not the case in Italy, so not surprisingly, our schools, by all indications, are not performing so well. And the final thing that I want to point out that exists in the literature and is recalled in the paper is that Anushek and Westman have looked at trends in scores, so worsening scores. Last line, and it's 25 minutes now, there is a relationship between the decline in test score performance, normalized test score performance, declines in some countries, increases in some other countries, and it's correlated to what happens to the growth rate. So the growth rate of Italy has declined in a way that is statistically well explained by a cross-country regression of test score performance and growth rates per capita. Food for thought. Ok, finito.
Okay, so this is a very, very rich paper, and the presentation of Giuseppe only gave a glimpse of its richness. There is in the paper a description of the evolution of the schooling system in Italy, of its weaknesses, of the root causes of this weakness, of the differences in geographical dimension, gender dimension, age dimension, comparison with other countries, the effect on growth, you name it. There is really a lot of things. The reader might get lost with so many threads to follow, so what I try to do is to follow just one thing, what I think is a single consistent story that runs through it, and indeed it came out already pretty well from Giuseppe's presentation, and then make a couple of comments on this particular story. Of course, this will not do justice to the richness of the paper, and I urge anybody who thinks that availability of a well-functioning schooling system is a key ingredient for equitable and prosperous society to read the paper. There is really a lot to learn. So what is the line of argument that I detect in the paper? So the evolution of Italy's education system did not follow a well-thought-out, consistent plan. Rather, it resulted from often contradictory trusts and suffered from a number of unintended consequences. This haphazard evolution led to a poor system, and one that is not always attuned with the need of an evolving economy, of the Italian evolving economy. So the natural conclusion that one tends to draw from this is that this should matter for growth, should have one of the reasons why we're not growing. To reach this conclusion, however, there is a kind of stumbling stone, the fact that we did grow in the past, for some periods, pretty well, in spite of the fact that the schooling system was already poor. So Giuseppe and Paolo do not think that this is the case. So they do not think that it's possible that the amount and the quality of education does not matter for growth. So the way in which they try to explain this anomaly of high growth with poor school is by postulating what I would call a sort of life cycle of education needs. The need for advanced education increases as the economy nears the technological frontier. In the 50s, vocational schools and on-the-job training were enough. Now that's no longer the case. Now things are different because of globalization, technological advances of various kinds require sterling tertiary education. Without it, we are doomed. So that's more or less the story that I detect in the paper. And these are my main comments. I have basically two comments. One concerns this reconstruction of the poor condition of the education system. Who should be blamed for that? And on this I have two comments. One, I think a little bit too much blame is put on the 68ers, and a little too little blame is put on the cultural element that were already presented almost at the very inception of design, at the design stage of the system. The second is whether or not there is this kind of life cycle of education need. And my comment is that the evidence which is presented for it is kind of weak, and there is some available evidence that suggests otherwise. Let me say immediately that as Diamond, not Peter the economist, but Neil the singer, I'm a believer. I mean, I'm convinced that there is this kind of education, life cycle of education needs, and I'm convinced by the story that they tell. I'm quoting here from their conclusion, and I totally subscribe it. I just wish the paper had stronger evidence to convince the non-believers. And I'll give you one example of non-believer. The Ministry of Education, she said that the recent school reform increased the weight of technical and vocational schools. So according to the way in which Giuseppe and Paolo described the evolution of the schooling system, she's behind reality by about 50 years. Now, it's obviously kind of rich to make fun of Minister Gelmini, and to be totally fair, there are other serious people with serious argument that claim otherwise, because, I mean, there is a fundamental issue here. Is Italy growing little or not growing because the human capital of its worker is low, or is the human capital of its worker low because there is no demand for it, there is no use of it? So disentangling these two effects is something which is a real issue, and a lot of people have debated, and the hope is that by looking at the historical perspective, we may be able to tell apart these two directions of causality. So let me now go a little bit into some details. First, the issue of the blame cast on the 68ers. So maybe I'm taking it a little bit too personally, because I'm really the representative of, but they are also of the court so let me go straight to the graph that they already show. Most of this blame is, attached to this dip here, to the fact that the court 50-55 had a higher the court 55-59 had a higher number of years of education and lower competencies. And also that after the unrest of the late 60s, the performance of the system, which is described by the mapping between years of education and competence reaches, remain shifted downward for a long period of time. Now, first of all, the court 50-54 was also affected by the unrest. By about 25% of the schooling year were affected by the same problems starting from 69 onwards. Admittedly, the 55-59 were affected by 60% of their schooling year, but still there should be an effect. And indeed, if you look at the slope of this curve, for the court 50-54, there is an uptick rather than already a down. And also, the whether or not the what did I do? Okay. So if you project the slope without taking into account the uptick of the 50-54, you see that the 55-59 are more or less on track. There is not really a big anomaly there. Of course, all these things are probably not statistically significant, as also Giuseppe said. But I'm just saying that it's kind of a stretch to infer so much from this kind of evidence. And also look at the fact that, broadly speaking, if the quality of the education system is measured by the slope of this this pendants. So by the way in which the years of education are transformed into competence, it's true, the system is uniformly worse, but it's not getting worse in time. It's more or less the same. The other aspect is the Gentile inheritance. This is where I think not enough blame is put on the paper, because the Gentile reform that took place in 1923 is presented as largely confirming the original blueprint of the Casati law, strengthening the controls by the central states. So the emphasis put on structural aspect, who funds the school, which rule, which control by whom. So all aspects are, I think, well taken. All this, I think, is correct. But I wonder whether ideology, the underlie the reform put forward by Gentile, did not matter as well. There are a couple of quotes here that I'm not going to read it. You can read it by yourself. But it's clear that there was a very strong anti-scientific attitude. And these were not just words. If you look at the weekly hours devoted to math and physics, before and after the Gentile reform, you can see that there is almost half. In the classical track, there were 20 hours devoted to math and physics. They go down to 13. The Technical Institute with a specialization on math and physics had around 30 hours devoted to math and physics. This one is totally eliminated. And even the scientific high school, so-called scientific, did not have more hours of maths and physics than what was the classical in the Casati system. Moreover, the Gentile reform, if you go and look at the ministerial direction that were given to schools, the reforms opposed the experimental and problem-solving approach that was slowly taking hold. That they actually tell teachers, you should not be concerned with these kind of things. You should give abstract principles. The chairs of math and physics were unified under a single chair, and these, according to commentators at the time, was considered as detrimental for both, for teaching math and teaching physics. And I found a nice quote from Quirino Majorana, a very well-known Italian physicist, that says, this is the end of physics in this country. So, to my mind, it's likely that all this left a long-lasting mark on the attitude towards science and technical knowledge, and as a father of a daughter who went to a classical school, I can tell you that this is really very apparent. So let me move to my other comment, whether or not there is this life cycle of education. I already told you what I mean by this. The idea is pretty much the same as in a paper in Journal of Economic Growth in 2006 by Van den Busch, Gaillon, and McGeer. It's kind of strange that I didn't quote it, but it's basically the same story. What?
It's almost common knowledge, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a peer report.
So it is, as I said, intuitively plausible. There are other stories possible. You might say that well inside the production frontier, scientists might have a higher return because they can not only push forward the frontier, but they can also copy. Or you can say that to kickstart growth, you need the establishment of some basic infrastructure, like, for example, judiciary system, and you do need some level of advanced tertiary education to do that. But anyway, I find the story plausible. But what is the evidence? If the story is true, you would expect apprenticeship, on-the-job training, and vocational schools be more easily available and more intensely used in those areas of the country that grew more during boom years, kind of diff and diff sort of experiment. The paper quote another paper by Vera Zamagni saying that it provides some support to this. I couldn't find the paper, so I could not check. But
it's difficult.
I searched everywhere and I couldn't find it. There is another paper by Schivardi and Torrini, which is quoted in a footnote, that also they find that the higher supply of college graduate at the local level, at the local labor market level, causes higher productivity growth. The main new evidence which is brought forward by this paper was already described by Giuseppe, the fact that there is a negative correlation between the made in Italy sector and the lag level of human capital, which of course does not explain, but the evidence is the fact that this negative relationship changes sign when you add the last decade. But this is no longer significant, so I would not make too much out of this. Other evidence, this is the same regression that Giuseppe mentioned at the very end, this regression between the average growth 1960-2000, controlling for the initial level of GDP, and average score of competencies, again controlling for initial level of year of schoolings. You see, there is no Italian anomaly there. Italy is very much in the middle of the cloud of countries, and the relationship seems to work pretty well for both countries at various levels of development. It works very well for Mexico, for Austria, for Germany, and so on. So from this, it's difficult to detect really a sort of breakdown of this relationship depending on the level of economic development. And also other evidence that I find is that in OECD countries, what matters is the share of population having at least basic human capital level, again measured by cognitive skills, not that of top performance, while the share of top performance matter for non-OECD countries. And also there is another regression which, excluding US, the years of education have no effect in the growth regression. So all in all, I would say this is a very nice paper that raises a key question. The issue I said before is try to disentangle whether human capital is a driver and a cause of the low growth that we are observing, or rather it is a result. It does not provide a conclusive answer, but I think it sets the stage for very important future research.
Thank you, Daniele. So the floor is open. Please raise your hand. Okay.
Two brief comments. The first one on your Germanian proposition that everything went bad since 1968. Now, one of the four competencies you just showed is the usual batting average argument. We know, and you mentioned, that basically the media unica was a big watershed in the after-war period in the Italian education system, basically putting forward within all Italian population, which is quite poorly educated at that stage, given a basic level of competence for everyone. So obviously, at the very moment you widen the base of the schooling system to more population, you might expect a temporary drop in the average point, provided that the measure you do for is actually that measure of competence. And then that would go very well with what you, Daniele, stressed afterwards, basically, that after the episode, things start going basically at the same way. So in a sense, I wonder whether the point issue is simply that at this stage we're coming with the widening of the school base important widening of the school base. The second issue, quite obviously, you always mention the Italian educational system as a unique system. No, we know very well that basically in this country there are at least two of more educational systems. You know, differences in school achievement are enormous going from north to south. I mean, especially in the northeast, school quality is comparable to the country like Finland, or in the south province. As far as we know, it's always been like that for over time. Now, here this is the interesting question itself. Why the system system, which is a unique set of rules, higher rules, and so on, provides such different, dramatically different outcomes. But maybe when you discuss the evolution over time, we focus more on the original differences.
Thank you, Giorgio.
I was saying that perhaps I shouldn't ask a question or comment upon a paper I haven't read, but the comment I make is on the basis of what I heard, and I'm puzzled by that puzzle of a negative correlation between growth and years of education in the years at the beginning of the 70s that you took up again in your discussion, which I wonder whether it could be due to the fact that in those years it seems that, seems to me at least, that staying longer at the university was a sort of a parking lot because of the slower growth in that period. You have lagged estimations, so perhaps this is taken care of by the lag. But isn't there a problem of education, particularly when you don't pay much for it, could be just a way to be unemployed while you are at university?
Everybody thinks this Italy is particularly particular, and so did I. But then I read papers by Dalia Marin, who is a distinguished economist for the multinationals, and Dalia Marin has produced papers on German education system and its influence on the relocation of German industry in Eastern European countries. And there she says that the phenomenon of the reverse maquiladores is extant. That is to say that now the schools in Germany, famous German vocational school, we have all imitated to some extent, or tried to, producing so bad results with their people who attend and people who get graduated from them. So when they go to work, the specialist workers are no good, so that reverse maquiladores phenomenon takes place, that you send for the complicated machining and other technical pieces of a certain production line to places like Slovakia and the Czech Republic and so on. And then when the easier parts are needed, you bring them back into Germany, finish them with these bad workers who are available in Germany, and then put the made in Germany thing on it. So that being the case, I asked my friend Old Freirish, who is also a rather well-known economic historian, whether he had read, and he said yes. And is it true? Yes, it is true. And also, the fact is that since 50% of the people who go to secondary school proceed to tertiary school, only the dregs of society go to those schools that don't allow you to go to the tertiary school. That accounts for the reverse maquiladores and the fact that good specialist workers are not produced in Germany anymore. So, what can we say about that? Only that the Germans have products that deserve the made in Germany and require a certain type of technology, which is only to be found in workers that are in the former socialist republic that were, as we know, so bad.
Thank you. There is time for one, Giacomo.
I was surprised that two relevant factors were not mentioned. The first has to do with the role of the family, the alternative to the Jesuits in charge of education in Italy. And it is well-known fact that during the times when the country was growing, the chances of getting a university degree, even if your father didn't have one, were much higher. And when the country is not growing, as it is now, the chances that you get a university degree because your father and grandfather had one already are greater, i.e. the system of formal education is not providing social mobility anymore. And you could inherit your university degree. I have 11 grandchildren, and since I got a university degree as well as my father and grandfather, the chances that these 11 grandchildren, even the 3 stupids of them, will get a degree at the university are 99.9%. This is only true of Italy. In most other countries, you still get people who go to university irrespective of their social background. And it was true in Italy in the 50s and in the 60s. And it is no more true now. So this is one big problem. The second big problem, if you go to a German institute like Max Planck, you will see in their official site, you will see that 10 years ago they discovered a very simple fact, typical of Germany, i.e., with negative demography, the chances of having very good university students tend to go down. Therefore, the best universities have to accept using English and give good scholarships to have the best from the world. The percentage of good foreign students in our universities, how much is it increasing? Compared with the rest of the world, even China. Now, this is the most worrying aspect for the future. Combined with the other one, Italians tend to get a university degree only according to the condition of the family. And we don't get our share of the best brain from other countries. This is, I mean, don't try to explain these things to our minister. When the Guria came from OECD on the 9th of May and presented the report from OECD on Italy, there is one page which says that the Gelmini reform is good, and there are 34 pages saying the list of what else should be done. And the answer by the minister was, I'm happy with the first page.
Okay, if there are no other comments, I think that Paolo Sestito is going to try to reply.
The paper is already quite rich if you look at it in positive ways, or it may be considered a bit messy because there are many aspects and issues. And actually, some of the comments were adding facts that we could have considered. And I think that some of them are clearly relevant, but we have not produced the paper just on the current state of the education system. In other papers, some of us have spelt with these issues, so for instance, we dealt in other papers on the signal, at least, which is coming from the very low percentage of foreign students in our university system, which is an indirect quality signal, for instance, or with the lack of social mobility role of the education system in Italy, which is very much related to its internal heterogeneity and the fact that the poorest regions, the schools in the poorest areas and in the poorest environments are the ones with the worst performance because they tend to have the least motivated teachers and so on and so forth. But I think that in a sense, focus on the more general ones. Do we have a story telling who has to be blamed for the current quality problems of the Italian system? And do we have a story telling that now the education matters more than in the past? I agree that the evidence for the last point is rather indirect. We do not have a strong evidence, we stressed it. Possibly the table number 6 in our paper is a bit stronger than what Daniele was suggesting to us, because we have not only a reversal in the sign of one coefficient, but we also have, if you look at the younger cohorts, Actually, the human capital of the youths components in the labor market becomes much more relevant and statistically larger as an impact. And this is statistical significant. But I don't think that we can discuss about what also us are considering as indirect evidence. The point is that we are not able at this stage to distinguish between two different possibilities. One, which is a general story. Now, human capital and formal human capital matters more than in the past, which may be related to the Aguillon paper and other evidence which is not coming from Italy, but which may matter for Italy as well. And the other story, which is we have had a deterioration in the quality. We, in a sense, think that both may be relevant. We have signals that both of these stories are present. As far as the quality is concerned, actually, we do not have only the picture that Daniele was referring to. We have also some evidence directly coming from the test, the international surveys conducted in Italy as well in the 70s and in the 90s. And for this, we see a deterioration in the quality, and we see it also in the primary segment, which is not one which in the 70s was not already a universal system. So it is true that there may be a quality-quantity trade-off when you enlarge the system, but actually Italy is quite unique in having such the bad aspect of such a trade-off, which didn't happen, for instance, in Finland, which is a good story, a positive story on both quantity and quality grounds. So, yes, there may be a trade-off, but Italy clearly has positioned itself in the wrong side of such a trade-off when you compare Italy to other countries. Just one final point concerning what we mean when telling that formal human capital may matter more than in the past. We don't mean uniquely that tertiary education matters now more than vocational training or primary and secondary school. This just for a very simple story. You can't have a good tertiary education system if you don't have a good primary and secondary segments. This particularly for a relatively small country like Italy. US has a good tertiary system without having any good and effective primary and secondary school system. But clearly this is something which is an opportunity which is not open for a country like Italy. Just in 2 minutes, 1 minute, yeah. On the issue of who has to be blamed, I think it is to a large extent an issue of emphasis. Our story is not that 1968ers have to be blamed. Our story would be, in a sense, along two lines. First, you had some reforms which didn't provide for a coherent response to those claims, to the issues raised by those events. So, in a sense, it is a bit more complex than blaming students and the 1968 events. And the second point is that, in a sense, many of the quality deterioration came just from organizational aspects. The deterioration in the recruiting system for teachers, the deterioration in the assessment and the presence of an external control and accountability of the system, which are not so intrinsically related to the egalitarian claims coming from 1968. They are very much related to the deterioration in the organizational setup of the system. But I agree that, in a sense, our intention was not to blame the 1968 events, so I don't think that we would fully square with the comment by Andrea Gavosto telling us that we were along the same lines of the current minister, but what we were blaming is the lack of a coherent response to the issues raised by those events. One final point on the on the broader cultural aspects. Well, we would agree with, let's say, the presence of an anti-scientific flavor in the Italian culture. Clearly, some of what Minister Gentile did was along those lines. Still, possibly because of the organizational setup and somehow the coherence of the system then put up, even if that system was clearly motivated by political reasons and political intentions, because monitoring of the system had not only a control of quality justification, mostly it had a political control justification, but as an indirect impact, it worked as a relatively effective control of quality system. And as far as the anti-scientific flavor of those interventions, they were relevant, but even in the 50s and in the 60s, the Italian system didn't fare too badly in terms of technical and scientific skills of the workforce. I don't know why, notwithstanding the cultural flavor and the increase in the anti-scientific flavor of the 20, 30 years before, but this is more or less a fact. Thanks.